BBC
6
Music.
BBC 6 Music.
Closer to the music that matters.
This is Richard Allenson with another programme in our series, The Record Producers. Tonight, Steve Levine and myself will look at the work of 4 musicians who are still very active in various areas of music, but who, collectively, created some of the most inventive British pop music of the 1970s. 10cc. Between 1973 and 1976, Eric Stewart, Graham Gouldman, Kevin Godley and Lol Creme produced 4 albums in the unique situation of being not only songwriters, musicians and arrangers, but also producers, engineers and studio owners. In other words, they were a completely self-contained package. Before we focus on their work from this mid-70s period, we'll take a look at the formative musical years of each of them, beginning with Eric Stewart.
The first guitar I got was through an accident with an air rifle. I used to live in a terraced house in Manchester, and you had a back entry and then there were houses behind you. I was popping off the pigeons, and I broke a neighbour's window, and he came round and said, "I'm going to report Eric to the police." So my father said, "Right, Eric, get rid of it." And I went to the local pawn shop on Ashtonall Road, and in the window there was a white Lucky 7 guitar. It would have been retailing around about 15 quid or something like that. And I did a swap. I swapped my air rifle for that guitar.
Eric was soon in his first band, playing cover versions of songs such as Please Don't Touch by Johnny Kidd and the Pirates, one of the first 3 records he bought, along with I Go Ape by Neil Sedaka and Bobby Darin's Dream Lover. But it wasn't always the song or the singer that got him hooked on a particular track. It was the sound of a particular instrument.
I used to love Rick Nelson's songs purely because of James Burton's guitar solos. They were fabulous. I didn't really care about Rick Nelson's voice, but James Burton playing that sort of guitar, I think he was 16 when he started doing those solos. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a James Burton, that sort of guitarist.
Eric's future bandmate Graham Gouldman was similarly enamoured with the guitar. His earliest instrument was a present from Spain, given to him by his cousin. But Graham's musical initiation was slightly different. He was brought up on a diet of the dance bands he heard on the Light programme, before Eddie Cochran, Buddy Holly, and in particular the Everly Brothers burst on the scene. But it was an early 60s hit that inspired him to pursue a serious musical career.
There was a record that pretty much changed my life. It had such a devastating effect on me, and that was Please Please Me by the Beatles, which I remember where I was in the kitchen of my parents' house, and this came on Saturday Club, which was a programme that Brian Matthews did, and I was aware of the Beatles and was really intrigued by them because I bought Love Me Do, and the B-side of that was a brilliant song called P.S. I Love You. But when I heard Please Please Me, some physiological change took place in me. It was, I suppose, I've never had a religious experience, but it might be something akin to that. And that really confirmed and consolidated all my ideas about what I wanted to be, both as a musician and as a songwriter.
Come on, 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 please, please me, oh yeah, like I please you. Me, oh yeah, like I please you. Me, oh yeah, like I please you.
So that's one half of the future 10cc. What about the other two? Kevin Godley and Lol Creme. Kevin Godley.
We found each other in our early teens and we kind of grew up together. We have very similar attitudes. We were both artistically inclined. We lived close to each other. We hung out with each other and we had a very similar worldview. And we both played instruments, you know, and it gradually became a band, I suppose. But I think our way of looking at things was infected by the fact that we were art students. And I particularly remember a tutor we had called Bill Clark. We used to go to an art class and he would say, try painting with your left hand if you're right-handed, try painting with your eyes closed, try painting whilst jogging up and down on the spot. In other words, he would challenge your technique in order to get something radically different from you that was unexpected. And I think that approach has kind of stayed with us subconsciously throughout our creative lives.
And Lol has his own memory of their first meeting.
What a happy day that was. We both went to a relatively newish youth club, the JLB, the Jewish Lads Brigade. It was run by a guy called Stan Rowe, who was not Jewish at all. And he ran the whole thing. He was brilliant. And it was his idea to have some kind of an art club, as the way I remember it. And I thought that would be fun. And I went to that. I went to the first meeting of the art club, and that's where I think I met Kev. And we became friends because I don't know how distorted this story has ever got over the years, but I seem to remember Kevin voicing an interest in making and going to make a film. He had a movie camera, and he was making his film of Dracula. And he was going to start the casting call. We were only 14, 15 years of age. And I got the casting call, and I was cast as Igor, the hunchback, in Kevin's production of Dracula. And that's how we met. And he was interested in music, and I was already playing guitar. And I seem to remember teaching Kev how to play the bass parts on a guitar, not on a bass, to some of the songs that we in this group, with my cousin, the Sabres, would be playing.
Kevin's early foray into the bass was on a 6-string Hofner Club 50. Not the right instrument for him. But a chance encounter with a drum kit owned by an arrhythmic neighbour brought out his natural musical ability. So he switched from strings to stool.
There were two bands that used to rehearse at the JLB, and one was a band called the Whirlwinds, which was Graham's band, and they were a kind of a Jewish show band. They all wore sort of pale blue suits with little sort of bow ties that tucked under the collar, and told jokes and played Buddy Holly songs, and the drummer did a drum solo. It was kind of a show band, cabaret vibe. And the band I was in was called the Sabres. And we were kind of, I wouldn't say hardcore, but we were a bit dirtier and rougher than the Whirlwinds, and we just played sort of R&B songs. At a certain point, the Sabres weren't going any further, and Graham formed a new band and asked me to be the drummer.
That new band was called the Mockingbirds, and they were signed to Immediate Records. Graham Gouldman.
We wanted to make a record, but no one would give us a song, or we couldn't find a song. And that really made me concentrate on writing myself, because I'd kind of dabbled, but I had a purpose now to write something for the Mockingbirds.
I gave you all I had to give. I swore without you I'd never live. The greatest love that had ever been. Cooled up and you picked me clean. There'll be a time when you'll regret. And 'cause the day that we ever met, you'll pay the price that a sinner pays, and go to hell for your evil ways. So my love.
Graham's song You Stole My Love by the Mockingbirds was released in October 1965. Although it failed to chart, Graham was already a hit songwriter, having had top 10 songs earlier that year with For Your Love and Heartful of Soul, recorded by the Yardbirds, who were in the top 3 at the time of the Mockingbirds release, with another Gouldman song, Evil Hearted You. October 65 was a pivotal time for another 10cc member, Eric Stewart. Having cut his musical teeth with his group The Emperors of Rhythm, he'd become a chart regular as the guitarist with Wayne Fontana and the Mindbenders. But Fontana's departure that month for a solo career saw Eric move into the spotlight, and future lineup changes over the next couple of years brought Gouldman and Stewart into contact.
During the sort of late 60s, I met Eric Stewart. The Mindbenders, of which he was now the sort of lead singer because Wayne Fontana had left the band, they were looking for another bass player, guitarist. He asked me if I'd fancy doing it, which I quite did, because the Mockingbirds wasn't having any success. I thought, oh, this could be quite good fun. And it turned out that the Mindbenders finished not long after I joined them. I don't know whether those two things are connected or not, but anyway, there it is.
The Mindbenders' demise was somewhat inevitable for Eric. New groups such as Led Zeppelin and Genesis, who took music in new and exciting directions, were beginning to emerge. With the hits drying up, the Mindbenders were left playing cabaret clubs around the country. It was time to call it quits and embark on a new venture within the music industry. When Eric first walked into a studio with Wayne Fontana, he'd been fascinated with what happened in the recording control room. When he first sat down in front of the mixing desk during those early sessions, he knew he wanted to engineer and produce records. Now he had a chance to do just that.
There was a little studio started up in Stockport called Intercity Studios. It was above a hi-fi shop. And I've been doing a couple of demos there to try and sell songs to people. I went down there, and the guy who was running it, Pete Tattersall, he said to me, Eric, I've got a bit of a problem here. He said, I've just been asked to vacate the premises. They're going to turn it into a canteen for their staff. So I said, right, well, Pete, I'm very interested in getting involved with the studio. I said, let's look around for some premises, and I'll put some bread into it, and we'll buy some decent gear. And we did. We found a beautiful little building. And that's where we created Strawberry Studios, which I'd named after the Beatles' Strawberry Fields Forever. And we opened the studio, and I went to the bank and borrowed some money and bought a Neumann U67, a valve mic, brand new. And we were suddenly, people were interested. We started to get the place rented, and people were recording there. Granada TV started recording there, doing the 5 o'clock show with Muriel Young, the gorgeous Muriel Young. And I think we even did the backing track to Coronation Street. We did that there. So that was my jump into a recording studio.
Graham Gouldman.
They needed some more money putting in, and he asked me if I wanted to become a partner, which I did. And so the studio had, I think it just had like a 2-track stereo recorder in originally, and then they got a 4-track. And the interesting thing that happened was that we all knew each other, myself, Eric, Kevin and Lol. And Kevin, Lol and Eric were in the studio one day, and they were testing the 4-track machine, and they just started playing something, just any old thing.
Godley and Cream were coming into the studio to do some of their work. I think they were called Frabjoy and Runcible Spoon or something, some weird name. But they were doing some great songs. And I said, would you mind staying when you finish your tracks? And I just want to see how many drum tracks we can get on the Ampex.
Kevin was banging on his drums, and I was strumming something to give him some inspiration to bang to. And I was sat on the floor in front of the bass drum. Eric was fiddling with, faffing with microphones, and Kevin, keep playing, play some more, Kev, play some more. Kevin, bang, bang, hours of banging. And I could tell that we needed something more to inspire us to keep strumming and banging. So I actually started singing to myself this silly little nursery rhyme, Neanderthal Man, and then it was suggested that we double it. And in fact, if I remember correctly, we triple-tracked the drums on 3 tracks, even though you weren't supposed to bounce to the next track, only 1 track left. But somehow it all worked out, and I had to sing the thing 3 times, so it was a triple-track vocal taking place on the floor into the bass drum microphone.
As I was mixing it down to a stereo master, Dick Leahy was about to come in later on to do a session with Mary Hopkins, which is something that Pete Tattersall would have done. He said, Eric, what was that thing you were playing? I said, oh, it's a little test we're doing to see how many drums we can get onto tape. He said, can I hear it? He came in the control room. I played him what I got so far. He said, you know, Eric, that's a hit record. Can we release it? I'd like to offer you a deal now. I said, well, that would be wonderful. He said, have you got a name for the group? And we said, no. And there was a lovely girl at the time, a receptionist called Kathy, and she used to wear these hot pants. We always used to call her Hot Legs. And we said, we'll call it Hot Legs. We'll call the group Hot Legs, we'll release it. We didn't think anything more would ever happen from that point. But blow me down, I think it was a number 2.
Yes, Neanderthal Man did reach number 2, but it wasn't the version that Dick Leahy heard.
He left and we promptly accidentally wiped it, which was a moment of extreme horror. And so we had to start from scratch again, and we did, and we just tried. We didn't know what the hell we were doing, but we were running on intuition and enthusiasm, and we came up with this thing called Neanderthal Man, and the rest is history, as it were. And it was purely, shall we say, it was created via applied ignorance, but a huge amount of adrenaline and enthusiasm.
Neanderthal Man proved to be a one-hit wonder for the Hot Legs trio. Gouldman, in the meantime, had been in New York writing songs for a publishing company that left him feeling as though he was working in a factory rather than the music business. But he persuaded them to let him return to Manchester and continue writing and demoing songs with his friends at Strawberry. The studio had now progressed from its original stereo recorder through the 4-track of the Hot Legs period to a newly installed 8-track machine. The 4 of them became an in-house band and occasional producers for a wide variety of studio clients, who included both the Leeds United and the Manchester City football teams, Led Zeppelin's John Paul Jones, and a central heating salesman who called himself Ramesses and believed himself to be the reincarnation of the Pharaoh. There was also a hugely successful American singer-songwriter of the late 50s and early 60s who, with the help of Lol, Kevin, Eric and Graham, was about to have a fresh run of chart hits. Neil Sedaka.
Standing on the outside, looking in. You know, it's been a long time. Don't know where to begin.
Neil recorded 2 albums at Strawberry, Solitaire in 1972, and a year later, The Tra-La Days Are Over, a record that Graham remembers fondly to this day.
Even with 8-track, there was still restrictions and decisions to be made. And if I ever listened to that album, which I love that album, I think it's great, it has a sort of live quality about it. Well, probably because some of the major components of the record were actually done live, and there was no way of doing them over again. So that was a very, very enjoyable time, and I think we all learnt a lot about studio performance as well. Although it has to be said that Eric had already been in a very successful band with the Mindbenders, and he'd been on hit records himself. So in a way, he was the most sort of knowledgeable about the studio, and he had the most technical know-how as well.
I would be on the control desk, and Neil would go in the studio to the grand piano with a vocal mic on, and Kevin would be on the drums, of course, Graham on bass, Lol on rhythm guitar, mostly at that time. And they would just keep going through the track until they'd got it. He was perfect, nearly every time. Even when we got a great take of his voice, one of us would have messed something up. And he would say, my God, we got to do the whole thing again? We got to do it again? Oh, my God. And we were really worried that he was going to think we were very unprofessional. But anyway, we did get on very, very well. And when we got the ultimate take of the sort of backing track, we could then overdub vocals, and then I would go in the studio and play lead guitar.
I pushed away them blues.
Standing on the Inside, from Neil Sedaka's 1973 album, The Tra-La Days Are Over. Although they were house band and producers for both this album and Solitaire the previous year, something major happened to the 4 British musicians between the 2 releases. They had their own hit and became a recording act in their own right.
Gonna meet you on the corner. Gonna take you out of town.
Lol Cream.
Eric and Graham had written a song called Waterfall, and Eric had a connection at Apple, the Beatles label, and there was a possibility of release for Waterfall. So that meant that we needed a B-side, and so because Eric and Graham had written the A-side, it was deemed that Kevin and I should write the B-side, right? And we came up with Donna.
was apparent to the group during its recording that the proposed B-side was actually the stronger track. The problem was they couldn't find anyone who would release it as a single. Then Eric remembered that record producer Jonathan King had recently started his own label, UK Records. He'd liked the work of the Mindbenders, so they sent both songs to him. King recognised Donna as a potential hit and was happy to sign them up, but there was one small problem. They didn't have a name. Despite much media speculation at the time, the true story is that Jonathan King had a dream that a group signed to his record label had both the #1 single and album on the American Billboard chart. And for some reason, this fictitious band had been called 10cc. Steve, Eric Stewart's been really generous, giving us exclusive access to a number of the multi-tracks for this programme, and we'll hear in depth some of 10cc's biggest hits in a while. But this first hit was cut on the same 8-track machine as the Neil Sedaka albums, wasn't it?
That's right, and this was a very good quality machine, and Eric was the engineer on those sessions. Now, when I transferred the original 1-inch 8-track into my computer system, what was very revealing was that on the tapes, there's also take 1 and 2. Take 3 was the master that became the finished record, but take 1 and 2 give a brief insight into the original backing track. And it's very important to remember that with 8-track, there were still some track restrictions, so getting the core backing track down, and in this case it's drums, Kevin on drums, Lol on one guitar and Graham on a second guitar, and that gave them the feel for the backing track. So if we have a quick listen to that, and you can hear why they did a second and third take. So as it got to the middle, it all went a bit pear-shaped.
And no one's ever heard these before, have they?
That's right, and take 1 and 2 probably haven't been heard since the day they were recorded,
Right.
because they subsequently would have overdubbed on take 3. And it's so important to get the feel on that core backing track. In other words, they transferred the principles that they'd learned on 4-track in the Hot Legs days to these early 10cc 8-track sessions.
Donna, just like Neanderthal Man, peaked at #2 in the charts in October 1972. A hasty follow-up and a similar 50s pastiche called Johnny Don't Do It was released the following month to capitalise on the newfound success, yet it sank without a trace. But their next single undoubtedly established their growing group reputation as musicians, songwriters and hit producers. Here's Graham Gouldman.
Eric would be in the control room, and Lol and I would go into the studio on this occasion with electric guitars, and Kevin would play drums. So the very, very basic track would be myself, Kevin and Lol, and we just keep taking it until it felt great. And we'd go in and check it, and Eric would usually say, yep, it sounds really fantastic. We'd go and have a listen to it, and then we'd start building on it. And we'd always try and put something weird on right at the beginning, so that everything we did subsequently was influenced by that one sound. And one thing we did, we put the bass guitar on the intros and the outro through a wah-wah pedal. So it's got so that gave it a sort of slightly strange edge.
Load up, load up, load up, we rubber bullets. Load up, load up, load up, we rubber bullets. I love to hear those convicts scream. It's a shame these slugs ain't free. But we can't have dancing at the local county fair.
Now, Steve, we've got the multi-track of Rubber Bullets. Can we start with that sound that Graham has just mentioned, that wah-wah sound on the bass, that what dang-wa-diddly thing?
Yes, I'll actually start by soloing and isolating the wah-wah on the bass guitar. Now I'll move to a section where it transitions from the wah-wah to the natural sound, so you can hear that. So first of all, it'll be the wah-wah sound. clean sound.
Wah-wah pedals don't normally get used on bass guitars, do they?
No, that was unusual at the time. Wah-wahs are more often associated with electric guitar, but to use it on a bass is more unusual. It's a totally different frequency, the bass guitar, so it creates a very different sound. Now, another thing I'd like to highlight is, because of the restriction of 8 tracks, there's a pair of tracks that contain piano, a couple of acoustic guitars, and what is Eric's trademark electric guitar sound. So if I solo those, this is a combination track, so the parts would have been recorded separately, but combined to this stereo track and mixed accordingly.
And it's already got reverb and a little bit of echo in there as well, by the sound of it.
Yes, because that's a combined track, Eric, as the engineer, would often make a picture of what he wanted sonically, so that included the elements, so you can hear it's pretty much push the faders up and those tracks are complete. The other thing that's worth highlighting are the backing vocals, so let me solo some of those.
Load up, load up, load up, we're rubber bullets. Load up, load up, load up, we're rubber bullets. I love to hear those convicts squeal.
You can hear Kevin's low vocal here. Now this became, I believe, quite a 10cc trademark to have the very low baritone vocal. And also, while we're highlighting the vocals, I'll highlight Lowell's lead vocal. Now this is double tracked on the single track, so I can't separate them. So it's a double tracked vocal sound on a single track.
So he's sung over himself at least once.
Yes, they would have done it on 2 separate tracks and combined it to a single track.
Right.
So that's the finished sound on one track.
And for miles around you could hear the sirens wail. There's a rumor going round death row that a fuse is gonna blow at the local hop, at the local county jail. What you gonna do? What you gonna do about it? What you gonna do?
Because of the limitation of 8-track and tracks being in very short supply, when they came to record the middle section of this song, they had to insert all the changes of instruments on pre-existing tracks. And Eric told me that it was such a mammoth task that he had to actually, apart from punching in on the particular track where he wanted to record the instrument, he would have to grab the tape spool to stop it going past the point. Otherwise, the erase head would have erased stuff that he didn't want to get rid of.
What was already on there?
Yes, and in fact, if I highlight this little section, you can hear where they drop in on the drum track. Now, this is true across all the 8 tracks, that at this point in the song, every single track has something different on it, which would have made mixing quite difficult and also recording very difficult because everything would have had to be punched in. So, for example, here's a multi-vocal sound just used in this one section and some alternative guitar sounds.
So if you drop in too early, you've recorded over something that should be there.
Yes, and you can't undo it.
Fatal.
Nerves of steel. Now, one of the other great production tricks used on this record is part of Eric's guitar sound, and in particular, the way that he played the parts. Kevin told me the process that Eric went through to achieve this guitar sound.
The most interesting thing I remember about that particular track is a lot of the guitars are speeded up. I remember Eric recording a number of guitar solo pieces to the track playing at half time. And it's when you actually play the record that the guitar playing is frantic. To me, is the thing I remember about that track more than anything else, double speed guitars, which was something I don't recall hearing up to that point.
Now, in order to demonstrate what Eric was listening to while he recorded the guitars, I've had to process this into a stereo file and reduce the speed. Ironically, one of the great things about analog recording was that if you wanted to do half-speed recording on a multitrack, you could just drop the speed from 15 IPS, inches per second, down to 7.5 IPS, play along with a track that was all slow like this, play your normal guitar, then when you sped it back up, it was a normal speed.
Was it just an octave lower?
Exactly,
Right.
An octave lower. Now, on a digital system, they don't like playing things at the wrong speed, so I've had to process this to give an effect of what Eric would have listened to. So on the left-hand side is the track at half speed, and on the right-hand side is Eric's guitar that he played at regular pitch. And you'll hear how it sounds at normal speed after the 6 Music News. So we're back on the record producers, and here's a quick reminder of how Eric's guitar sounded at half speed. And now here's the same guitar played at normal speed.
Dean and I cemented 10cc status as chart artists, a worthy if off-kilter follow-up to their #1 Rubber Bullets. The song was written by Lol Cream and Kevin Godley.
The inspiration for it came from sort of kitsch Hollywood musicals. You know, sort of Doris Day meets Frank Zappa, if you like. And the changes that track goes through, it never stops. It starts at one place and ends in another, and it's full on with dynamics and intensity and insanity and odd sounds, and actually is about as far away from the blues as one could possibly get. And I think Eric's heart was in the blues at that point, and it was a bone of contention. We all knew it was an extraordinary song, but we didn't know what the hell it was. And, you know, it was either one of the things that you either loved or hated. But we got, I think, you know, me and Lol got out of it what we were looking for. But it was a very strange hybrid of a track.
Steve, Kevin doesn't think it was possibly one of Eric's favourite singles of theirs, but there's lots of elements to this. Notably, we've got more tracks.
Well, this is now 16 tracks, so it gives yet more freedom. One of the things that I think, for me, listening to this record, that is a real motif are these fantastic vocals at the front of the song. Now, these consist of multi-track pairs of tracks and this track with some strange phasing effects on it. So let me solo those, because I think they're really interesting.
And they're just making noises, aren't they?
Yes, but it's the phaser that gives that extra sound. And when you combine the three tracks together, you get this amazing effect. Lol did a lead vocal on this track, and it's double-tracked, and the two tracks are separate. Unlike Rubber Bullets, which we featured earlier, where the tracks were combined, here they're still separate. So here's the original vocal take.
We were dancing and romancing at the senior prom. It was no infatuation.
And now singing over himself with the double track, which creates that lovely sound.
From a boy to a man, let me tell you while I can, the soda pop came free.
And again, there's certain things through 10cc records that are absolutely 10cc trademarks. There's Eric's guitar sound, Lol's lead vocal sound when it's double track. These all become part of what the audience perceive as a 10cc
but
record.
in the eyes of the dean, his daughter was doing what she shouldn't have oughta. But a man's gotta do what a man's gotta do. The consequence should be church bells, three swells.
Because the band had 4 great singers in it, they've really gone to town on this track on some of the harmony work. Let me solo some of these great vocals.
They were dating in the park, they were smooching in the dark of a doomsday for two. She whispered, I love you.
It's worth remembering that each one of these tracks is multiple tracked, and together, mixed and blended, they create this lovely, lovely sound, especially this middle section.
Has gone AWOL, 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 AWOL.
Now just imagine how complicated this is to record when you have that ding dong, all of those have to be done separately and then combined together to create this great sound.
Now, you've got 16 tracks here. Could they have done this with 8?
This would have been quite difficult on 8-track. One of the advantages of 16-track, particularly with the way they did their vocal arrangements, was it enabled them to combine them to these separate tracks. So they still got control in the mix. It's not as chaotic as some multi-tracks we've featured, but it is laid out in a methodical way. I think that's down to the fact that Eric not only was the engineer, but also part of the band. So he would have been able to work out what the next overdub was and what available space he had on the tracks.
So we have the vocals, we have Eric's trademark guitar, which he didn't plug into an amplifier, he just plugged into the recording desk.
That's right. Exactly the same concept as used on Rubber Bullets. Straight into the mixing console, DI, direct injected. But what he would do was to wind the gain control up to 11, and that would distort within the desk, but it creates this sort of bumblebee-like distortion. Now, these are 2 tracks, and both of them are in harmony, so that would be at least 4 tracks of guitar to create this sound.
And the drums, is it my ears, but the drums just sound slightly different to the drums we heard earlier on Rubber Bullets?
Well, the drums are spread across more tracks, and fashions changed. This was a later recording, and there was a little bit more of an open sound to them. So they sit really well in the track.
Hey, you know I'm really earning now. My ship came in with a cargo of dollars. My name's lit up on the prow. It's a wonderful world when you're old $80.
The Dean and I reached the top 10 for 10cc in the late summer of 1973, and as the band moved into 1974, Graham, Kevin and Lol picked up the Ivor Novello Award for Best Beat Song for Rubber Bullets. The group reconvened at their second home, Strawberry Studios, to begin work on their second album, Sheet Music. 10cc was the perfect self-contained unit at this stage, and it's a period Graham Gouldman remembers with extreme fondness.
It was really a fantastic time because we were all writers, we were all producers, and we all sang, and we had our own studio. Eric Stewart engineered all the sessions. So we were in a very unique position in that we didn't need anybody else in the studio with us at all. It was just the band.
Kevin Godley.
It was a natural thing. Eric had the best pair of ears, in a sense, because he was very interested in the studio process. Don't forget, he instigated Strawberry, and then Graham came to join him, but it was his idea to begin Strawberry. Him and Peter Tattersall, they started Strawberry North. So he was totally into the recording process. So he was the natural engineer, if you like.
Although the group had the luxury of its own studio with Strawberry, owned by Eric, Graham and Peter Tattersall, it still had to operate as a business. It had moved from stereo to 4-track, then 8-track, and was now a 16-track facility. During the making of Sheet Music, the band would often share the facilities with other artists, and Strawberry Studios was attracting some top-name clients. Eric Stewart.
Paul McCartney was in with Mike McGear during the day with Jimmy McCulloch and Linda, and they would be in all day, and we would come in the evening as they were wrapping up, and we'd say, well, did you get anything good today? They'd play us what they'd got. We'd work through the night. They'd come in the morning. We'd play them some of our stuff. And I've still got a lovely little postcard from Paul saying, you guys are brilliant. Don't stop. I've still got it. He was from Scotland. And he'd ripped the stamp and written next to it, oh, I'm sorry, Your Majesty. I actually used the drums that Paul had set up with Jerry Conway, great drummer. He set up with very loose skins. Those are the drums I used on Wall Street Shuffle. They've got a really low, heavy sound when you whack the tom-toms, and a big, deep Gretsch snare drum. So we were nicking bits from each other. It was so exhilarating.
Wall Street Shuffle was written by Eric and Graham, but it was a favourite of fellow band member Kevin Godley.
It's funny, but whenever those two wrote together, there was occasionally a sort of, the lyric about money used to come in every now and again. It's interesting. That was a great track, one of my favourite 10cc tracks of all time. Great tempo, great lyric, great tune. Not that difficult to record, but a great hook, fantastic hook.
So, Steve, another of these never-before let-out-of-the-box multi-track tapes that Eric Stewart has given us. Wall Street Shuffle. A brilliant record for me as a disc jockey, because it's one of those records you just press play and everybody knows what it is.
It is a cracking record. It's also one of my favourites. And that intro is absolutely instant. Two things that are so synonymous with that record is the guitar, Eric's famous sound again, and the backing vocals. So let me start by isolating the vocals. Now, what they've done on this track is the vocals take up 3 tracks. Each track is multi-layered with a separate harmony on it, including the lead vocal. So we'll start by listening to the first part.
Do the Wall Street Shuffle.
Now here's the second part.
Hear the money rustle.
And now the third part.
Watch the greenback
And that forms the chord of what is the hook of Wall Street Shuffle.
Feel the sterling crumble.
Really great vocal arranging. Because they had 16 tracks available, they were able to multi-track them, but also keep the relative harmony parts separate. And that's what I've isolated here, the separate harmony parts.
You gotta be cool on Wall Street.
Gotta be cool on Wall Street when your index is low.
This makes mixing so much easier because you can change the balance as the song goes on.
Because the thing that's always struck me about 10cc records is that at different parts of the song, as well as the vocals taking a different emphasis, different instruments come to the fore to take on a different role.
That's right, and because of the complexities of the way they recorded it, Eric would very often add any particular effects that he wanted to the track involved. So if I, for example, solo the piano, you can hear that not only is the piano beautifully recorded, but it's also got certain elements of studio trickery on it. A certain effect has been added, a delay and what's called a chorus. Now, he's recorded that with it. He was obviously happy with the sound, and that's it. It also makes my job now much easier because I don't have to try and replicate what Eric once did. The effect is there for me, so I just have to push the faders up.
And another 10cc record which is just full of very, very neat little production tricks.
That's right. Because of their songwriting prowess, each little section would have someone else's input on it, which made it actually a journey. So the song never gets boring. Every little section, it's not just verse, chorus, verse, chorus. Each bit has a little something on it, whether it's Eric's trademark guitar sound, one of Lol's vocals, or Kevin's low octave vocals, which became also part of the 10cc trademark sound. There's always something that catches your ear.
Wall Street Shuffle and its parent album Sheet Music entered the UK charts in the week dated 15th of June 1974. Both the LP and the B-side of the single introduced 10cc fans to a new gadget invented by Kevin Godley and Lol Cream.
I'd always wanted my own personal orchestra. I'd always said to my dad, you know, for Christmas, can I have an orchestra, please? I loved it. I loved what orchestras could do, and I'm not that great on a guitar, but I had this notion. And so, of course, it was another of those silly ideas that I put to Kevin, who was always game for a laugh. And between us, we concocted this device that bowed the strings of a guitar. And it was a gizmo, right? And we built a prototype. And we actually had it live on stage, and we were using it. There was a song called All Wild Men, and we did the stringy sort of noise with the gizmo, which was attached to my Strat. And we had interest from a production company, a company that made boxes for guitar players, Musitronics. They made biphasers and made the best boxes in the world at that time. And they got interested in the gizmo. They came to a show in New York and saw it and asked if they could help make it. And we were so thrilled by that. So the gizmo became far more important and exciting thing for me and Kev than actually being in the group, to be honest.
Lord have mercy on me and on
The album Sheet Music spent nearly 6 months on the chart and not only featured the gizmo, but also everything from the auto harp and bouzouki to the mellotron, rhythm skulls, and even Kevin tap dancing. 10cc were musicians and producers who were not afraid to experiment in the studio, whether in swapping writing partners or creating unique sounds. Graham Gouldman.
We always wanted to find different ways of doing things. Sometimes we'd sort of have the bass going directly into the board, and then at the same time we'd have a mic strapped to it, like a big Neumann, taped onto the guitar. People could say, well, what difference would that make? But it didn't make any difference. It was kind of, we noticed it was slightly different, and all those sort of details go into a record that people might never ever hear, and yet what the feeling that they get from the record, those little things have contributed to, even if they can't hear them.
Eric Stewart.
One of the things that really did help the writing situation with 10cc was because we didn't want anyone to sort of get all the dough. We didn't want anyone to put a song in there saying, you know, you got 2 songs on and I've got to have my 2 if they were not good songs. We agreed between us that we would split the publishing between the 4 of us, no matter who wrote the song. It was very equitable for 10cc to do it this way, and it got rid of a lot of animosity and also got people really thinking about developing their writing talents a bit more.
And just because you wrote the song didn't necessarily mean you'd sing it. Kevin and Lol.
What happened is each member of the band went in to the studio on the mic and attempted to do the vocal part in question, while the others stared at him through the glass, and if it didn't pass muster, it was next. And then Eric would go in and he'd try it, and if it wasn't good enough, next. And then Lol would try. Eventually we'd find out the right person for each written vocal part, and that's how we did it. It wasn't written for each of us, in a sense. We had to try it out to get there.
Do you know what it was like? The producers, the movie The Producers, singing Hitlers, dancing Hitlers. You know, when that guy just... I was the lead in Lilac Time. Next!
The album Sheet Music marked the end of their time with Jonathan King's UK Records. 10cc were hot property, and labels were queuing up to sign them. The band took a much-needed holiday, leaving their managers to sort out the finer points of a new contract, which they both hoped and believed would be with Richard Branson's Virgin Records. So they were shocked to find that in their absence, they'd been signed to Philips Phonogram. But the first album they delivered to their new label, in 1975, showed no signs of their disappointment. The original soundtrack.
We decided that we needed to do something pretty different than sheet music. Initially, we started with the idea of doing a whole concept album based on one song by Kevin Lol called One Night in Paris. And we did actually record the thing, and it was long, and it just didn't gel. And I said to them, look, I think there's some great ideas in here, but we should edit it down to a smaller piece of music, small cameo of a musical, and see what happens. And we all agreed, OK, let's try that. And we did. I edited it down, and we got what is there, which I think is an 8-minute version of One Night in Paris.
One night in Paris is like a year in any other place. One night in Paris will wipe the smile off your pretty face. One girl in Paris is like loving every woman. One night in Paris, one night in Paris, maybe your last.
One Night in Paris was the opening track on the original soundtrack album, and its release in March 1975 preceded its lead single, Life is a Minestrone, by a couple of weeks. So, Steve, we're here again with another multi-track tape from Eric Stewart, and it's Life is a Minestrone, and it has another distinctive 10cc intro.
It does, and one of the great things of having the actual multi-tracks in my possession is that you can get to hear some of the outtakes or the bits that happened before the actual track started. Now, this is a great case in point. If you just listen to the start of the intro, this isn't the actual final intro.
This didn't appear on the record.
It went pear-shaped just at this point. Now, the other curious thing is that when the track now starts up again, apart from the fact that you can hear the multitrack starting up, that's that nyap, nyap, nyap sound as it builds up the speed. Now, most people are probably only familiar with the single version. The actual recording starts like this. That's the full album version. The single started like this.
And that piano.
Now, this piano is acoustic piano, but during the song, there's also a very important Fender Rhodes, an electric piano part. And what's really fascinating about this particular track is the way that Eric has included the original sound of the piano, and it sounds like he's really hitting it hard, but he's recorded a very strange echo. And you can hear in the background some drum effect on it. This tinny little sound you can hear is added to the composite sound.
But if it's such a tinny sound, if it's such a sort of a dot on the big sonic landscape, we can't hear it in the final mix, can we?
Well, you can, because what happens, you have the plus and minus, that because it is so tinny and thin sounding, combined with the full sound of the drums, it creates an interesting effect. The drums on this particular track are recorded across 4 tracks. So on this particular multi-track, there's a separate bass drum and snare. And in fact, the actual finished record, the snare is quite loud on this record, because Eric would have had additional control having the snare drum on a separate track.
The original soundtrack was the group's most successful album. 2 singles were lifted from it, Life is a Minestrone and a Stewart and Gouldman song that developed from an idea Eric had.
The title of that song came from something my wife, Gloria, said to me, Eric, you don't say I love you as often as you used to. My idea at the time was, well, look, if I keep saying it to you every day, it's going to become meaningless. I love you, I love you, I love you. But the more I thought about it, I thought, now, how could I say it without actually using those words? And I thought, now, if I say I'm not in love, but here are all the reasons why I still absolutely adore you, that was an interesting twist.
It was certainly an original approach to a love song, but their first try at recording it fell flat. It had been given a Burt Bacharach meets bossa nova feel. For the track to work, they needed to find a different approach.
Kevin said, why don't we do it almost a cappella, using totally, for the backing track, totally voices, all voices, not Beach Boys type of voices, just a wall of sound. I said, yeah, and how are we going to do that? And it was Lol who came up with the idea of making tape loops that we could run ad infinitum, forever. We'd just run them. So we spent another 3 weeks then recording 3 guys, Kev, Lol and Graham, just singing Ah in the studio onto the 16-track machine. Each note had 16 tracks of 3 people, if you've got your calculator there. And we had to record a chromatic scale of 12 voices that would fit any chord in the song. We put the tape loops around this Studer stereo machine and then out to mic stands with little rollers on the top so the tape would run through there and we could tension the machine properly. Then I fed across to the 16-track machine and filled each of the 12 tracks with a separate note of these masked vocals. So I think eventually there were 256 voices on these tracks. And at the same time, we'd recorded a very, very simple backing track, stereo backing track, with me on electric piano, little rhythm guitar, and Kevin playing a bass drum on a Moog synthesizer, just to follow it.
I'm not in love, so don't forget it. It's just a silly phase I'm going through.
The four of us actually got around the control desk and started to feed the chords as they were changing within the song, up and down with the faders. And whilst we were doing that, I'd locked all the faders with a piece of gaffer tape, so they're all around about minus 24 on the faders. But because it was a chromatic scale, there was this lovely sort of hissing, breathy sound, like when you walk in a concert hall and people are just talking very quietly, but there's this wonderful hiss.
All of which probably explains why nothing had ever sounded quite like that record before, had it?
It was a milestone in recording. The production was absolutely beautiful, and the process that they went through to create this epic record was incredible, bearing in mind the time. This is 34 years ago that this record was made. So a lot of the techniques that were used on this record were done for the very, very first time, especially the vocals. Now, as Eric mentioned, the vocals were recorded individually across the 16 tracks and then bounced down. Now, luckily, at the very, very front of this multi-track, there's the remnants of one of the tracks. So this is actually what one of the multi-tracked voice loops actually sounded like. So if I isolate that first, and that very slight blip you can hear, that's where the splice would have been in the loop. So although you can actually hear the loop as it goes through with the splice point, in this case, when you had the other 11 added, all at different splice points, the loop point would have been inaudible. So now if we start the actual multi-track up, you can hear what Eric was talking about, this sound that does sound like you're entering a cathedral or some hallowed space. And what we're hearing is a result of them playing the mixing console as if it was a keyboard come instrument. So each fader had one particular note on it. So putting, say, 3 or 4 faders up would create a chord. And as they knew what the chord progression of the song was, they could go through it bit by bit. They could, of course, drop in and out of the stereo track that I'm now playing to correct any errors in their mixing. So this final track is a result of all those man-hours of work. It's absolutely beautiful. The other addition is that there's a second track of the same thing but played at half speed, so that creates this low octave. This is particularly noticeable on the bit where it goes ha 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 ha. And you can hear both the high original pitched vocals and the low octave vocals.
So Eric's using his half-speed trick again, which he obviously likes. I don't remember another record that starts off with the vocals being produced and then you playing along with it. But this seems to have started with just the vocals.
That's right, they created a guide backing track just to make sure they mixed the vocals in the right sections with the right balances. But once they had their correct vocal track, they then proceeded in the control room, which creates a very, very different atmosphere, played in the control room the rest of the instruments, the Fender Rhodes, the electric guitar, and curiously, no drums. This bass drum was actually created by a Moog synthesizer. Now, Lol had one of the very first Moog synthesizers in the country, and he'd learnt how to program it, so he was able to create this unusual, soft bass drum sound, which Kevin played, being the drummer, throughout the song. In fact, a real drum kit would have been overpowering on this record, so it suits the subtlety of the backing track. So you're right that they played along to a pre-recorded ooh backing track, which is unusual. So once they got the backing track to their satisfaction, they then subsequently overdubbed in the traditional sense. So, for example, the other backing vocals were sung to a finished track. So let me isolate those first of all.
Ooh, you wait a long time for me. Ooh, you wait a long time.
Now, there are many things on this record that people will be so familiar with, and I think one of the most familiar things is the spoken voice. The only time that there's not a 10cc person on this record. Now, this is Kathy, the studio secretary. And once again, to make my job easy, Eric has recorded the effects on Kathy's voice. So what you're hearing is exactly as Eric recorded it, including the fact that it fades out as it loops round.
Be quiet. Big boys don't cry. Big boys don't cry. Big boys don't cry.
So that's Kathy with the nice voice.
And it is so integral to the record. You can't imagine that not being on there. And just a great production trick. Now, talking of things that are not on there, there's one part of Eric's lead vocal that never made it to the final record, and luckily they never erased it. So here is an alternative lead vocal at the bridge section. Now, when they came to mix the record, or just before they came to mix the record, Lowell had suggested that they didn't really like that section, so he played the melody on a piano, and that's actually what's on the finished record. But at the same point on another track is Eric's original vocal with some other lyrics.
Don't feel let down. Don't get hung up. We do what we can. Do what we love.
This is probably the first time this has ever been heard outside of the studio, and probably for 34 years. So is that a case of we are so familiar with the finished record that by now hearing that section it sounds out of place? Had we grown up with that part, maybe we'd have got used to it.
Any other little tricks and surprises you've discovered?
Yes, this little sounds interesting. This is a music box and there's 2 tracks of it. It was double tracked. Again, it's another one of those little production tricks that maybe not so familiar to everybody first time on listening, but now I'm pointing it out to you. I think if you listen to the record again, it'll be very familiar.
How did they do that then?
They told me that it was one of those toy music boxes on a string that you pulled to make it play its little tune, and then by double tracking it, it creates this very slightly strange Doppler effect. Plus there's a lot of echo and effects added to it, which creates this sort of somewhat surreal sound. It fits so well in the track.
Be quiet. Big boys don't cry. Big boys don't cry.
I'm Not In Love was presented with 3 Ivor Novello Awards: Best Pop Song, International Hit of the Year, and Most Performed British Work. To date, the song's been heard on American radio over 3 million times, and if our calculations are correct, if we allow a full running time of 6 minutes per play and we run those plays back to back, it would be roughly the equivalent of 34 years of airtime for a single released in May 1975. The track is full of clever production tricks, but it all boils down to the quality of the material you have to work with. Co-writer Graham Gouldman.
If you have a great song, the production almost takes care of itself. It's hard to put a foot wrong because the song dictates everything. And every producer knows that feeling of when you're trying to make something work and everywhere you turn, it's just not happening. That's because you've got to have the right song. So we all had lots of ideas. It was a tremendously creative process. Every idea that came up worked. Of course, one of the cleverest things that any producer can do, as with writing a song as well, is to know when to stop. And we all agreed it was finished.
The original soundtrack in 1975 marked 3 albums by the group in as many years, and the workload of writing, touring and recording showed no signs of letting up. By February 76, they'd released their 4th and what would prove to be the final album together. How Dare You?
Just like a rolling stone, I'm outside looking in. But if your chance came, will you take it? Where on earth do I begin?
We recorded some good songs and there were some interesting things on it because it was great fun to do, as recording and writing always is. But the innocence had gone somehow by then, and the band was a fully functional touring, recording, writing machine with people working for us and so on and so forth. And I don't know, the sort of edge had gone from it.
Cracks were beginning to show in the band, and there was an obvious frustration after the release of How Dare You. When Eric presented the group with a new song called The Things We Do for Love, it proved to be a major turning point for them. Kevin and Lol were keen to do more experimental work, and they felt they were hearing just a run-of-the-mill pop song. So they decided to go their own way and return to the musical gadget they'd used on the sheet music album, the Gizmo.
We'd invented this device before 10cc came into being and kind of shelved it with the thought that, we don't know how long this is going to work for, it's great, but at some point we've got to come back and try and put this thing out on the market and make sure we've given it its best shot. I think after How Dare You, it felt like time to go back to this thing and see what we could do.
By the end of 1976, Godley and Creme had parted company with Eric and Graham. They booked 3 weeks in Strawberry North to experiment with what the Gizmo could do. These results laid the foundations to an ambitious project called Consequences, which grew into a lush triple-album box set. The work included a playlet that called on the services of Peter Cook, a piano concerto that was played to save the world, and a wide range of sonic experiments to create animal stampedes, tidal waves, firework displays, and funeral burials. Co-creator Kevin Godley.
I think we were frustrated filmmakers, is the truth of the matter, and we couldn't get our hands on filmmaking equipment. We were successful musicians, so let's make a movie for the ears.
I had a different experience to Kev on doing Consequences. I just enjoyed myself so much, making these noises with the Gizmo. And we made it as interesting as we could for Kev, but really I had most of the fun because I was doing the actual playing of the Gizmotron and got to try all these sound experiments and arrangement experiments. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. And then when it came to the song part, I loved the fact that we had Sarah Vaughan to sing a song with Kev. That duet, Lost Weekend, a song we banged out these songs, and somehow, we said we wanted another. I think we originally tried to get Ella Fitzgerald, and she wasn't available, but Sarah Vaughan was. And I thought, my God, yes, please.
Friends or lovers, who can tell when the dust finally has settled? Will I be left with roses or with nettles? Or whatever happened on that lost weekend?
We were kind of pushing ourselves to the limit. We had a great engineer who managed to capture the smallest, slightest nuance of whatever it was we were trying to do. We went through some pretty strange machinations to record stuff. We would do field recordings. We did a field recording of fireworks, of Doppler effects of cars going by. A lot of this stuff was real and outside the confines of the studio. That was very interesting.
Where you gonna hide?
Godley and Creme were certainly not afraid to try new things to recreate animal stampedes and firework displays. And in the case of the burial scene, something that looked as though it was used to model wigs, known as the Sennheiser head.
It was like a human head, and the microphone set into this polystyrene head so that it would record really like the human head would hear things, with stereo in the same way. So, of course, we arranged a bunch of experiments. One part of the album, we needed to bury somebody alive, I believe, so we dug a grave, or gave that impression, and buried the head, and we had our poor roadie hold the head in some terrible cellar and dump soil on him. And it really sounded like it would sound if you were in a grave in your coffin.
For as much as it has pleased Almighty God of his great mercy to take unto himself the soul of our brothers here departed, we therefore commit their bodies to the ground. Earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, in sure and certain hope of the resurrection to its...
We slung about 200 versions of 24 tracks worth of buckets of water being thrown against a wall and multi-track that to sound like some Hawaiian earthquake and hurricane. We needed a giant firework display that supposedly scared all the animals in Africa, and we went to Paynes Wessex and they gave us these great big fabulous fireworks. And I think we set them off on Salisbury Plain and places like that. We were having the time of our lives. That's why I enjoyed myself so much in Consequences. It was like letting go, man, letting rip.
And on top of all this, there was the play with Peter Cook.
God bless his cotton socks. The difficulty was keeping up with his drinking habits. He would get up, fresh as a daisy, had read all the papers by 8 in the morning. He was drunk as a skunk by 11 in the morning. He went to sleep for the afternoon, did a load of good work whilst sort of semi-drunk, then really started drinking in the evening at dinner. And at 4 in the morning, we have to pour him into his bed. But he was up at 7 o'clock in the morning, fresh as a daisy, writing out the material that we thought for sure he'd forget. But for 3 months, we were knackered. He was fine.
Rosie, I wish that you were here. I miss you so much, Rosie. My dear, my Rosie. Rosie, I miss the hell that we raised and the trails that we blazed. I miss the other half of me.
Consequences was a mammoth and expensive project, but one that unfortunately showed little commercial reward. Eric and Graham, in the meantime, continued with 10cc and released what was to be their biggest global single, The Things We Do for Love.
Too many broken hearts have fallen in the river. Too many lonely souls have drifted out to sea. You lay your bets and then you pay the price. The things we do for love. The things we do for love.
The Things We Do for Love by the new Slimline 10cc of Eric and Graham, along with the new drummer Paul Burgess, was a bigger international hit for the group than I'm Not in Love. Its parent album, Deceptive Bends, gave them another top 10 with Good Morning Judge and an American hit with the plaintive People in Love. The follow-up album, Bloody Tourists, was recorded with an expanded lineup and saw them back at #1 with Dreadlock Holiday. But things were no longer the same. Eric Stewart.
It was a different sort of band, and we were moving in a very different direction. The wackiness had gone, and I really did miss that. And that's what Kevin Lowell used to contribute to the band. I really did miss it, even though we were getting some serious hits. I miss that craziness.
10cc continued into the early 80s, but with diminishing chart returns. Dreadlock Holiday was the band's last major hit, but as individuals, both Eric and Graham embarked on a number of other projects. In the late 70s, Stewart was on hand to help launch the career of another Manchester act, Sad Cafe, producing their breakthrough hit Everyday Hurts, the parent album Facades, and the subsequent chart singles Strange Little Girl and My Oh My. Whilst his own group's fortunes were on the wane, Eric continued his chart profile through his production work for both Sad Cafe in the late 70s and ABBA's Agnetha Feltskog in the 80s. He also spent several years working on Paul McCartney's albums, including Tug of War, Pipes of Peace and Press to Play. Graham, on the other hand, had taken a different production route. Alongside music for an animated film about Animal Olympics, Gulben was called in to produce an album for a band that seemed a million miles from the 10cc sound, Pleasant Dreams by the Ramones. The band had wanted to work with Graham, not because of the 10cc days, but due to a love of the songs he wrote in the 60s. The bulk of the album was cut in New York and featured both Gouldman and Russell Mael of Sparks on backing vocals. But Graham's natural home, Strawberry Studios, was also used on the project. In terms of his own recording output in the 1980s, Graham was now in a happy writing partnership with Andrew Gold, who'd been drafted into a late version of 10cc early in the decade to give the group a more American sound. Together, they had a hit as Wax with Bridge to Your Heart. The early 80s brought renewed success to the other two original members of 10cc. After a few false starts at a top 40 career, Godley and Crean were now chart stars as a duo. Not only that, but they were at the forefront of the new video promo age as directors. Kevin Godley.
We were shooting a video for Toyah Willcox called Thunder in the Mountains, I think it was, on some airfield somewhere. And on the day of the shoot, we found out that Under Your Thumb had just come in the charts at number 30. So we were auteurs, we were Renaissance men. We were doing two things at once. Eventually the music video world took over more of our time, but we were in a great position to be able to do both with as much enthusiasm as we could muster.
I was standing in the station being pounded by the rain, so I chose the last compartment of a stationary train. I felt someone get in behind me, but I never caught their eye. But I thought I heard a woman's voice whispering goodbye. So I lay down in the darkness with the beer and coffee stains, and I stared out at the thunder through the broken window panes. And although the storm was booming like an engine in the sky, I'm sure I heard a woman's voice cry, don't wanna be under your thumb forever. Don't wanna be under your thumb forever. Don't wanna be under your thumb. It's over and done, I'll never be under your thumb forever.
Under Your Thumb was an unusual song, as it relied on sparse percussion to simulate the movement of a train and had next to no bass line running through it. It wasn't the most commercial sound, but a very effective production trick that endeared itself to the record-buying public. Its follow-up was a much more commercial affair.
I should have told you all I wanted was to have some fun. But you wanted me to be the permanent one. Yes, you did. Now when we're in the movies or the back of the car, you always stop me when I go too far. I should have known you'd always keep me waiting for those wedding bells.
Wedding Bells had more than a nod in the direction of Motown, but Lowell Crean believes there was another key ingredient to that song.
The biggest influence on that record, from my point of view, was the Lindrum, because Kevin discovered the Lindrum, and from that point on it was nightmare to get him behind his kit. Became the laziest drummer you ever met. The Lindrum was perfect for Kev, because you see, Kevin loved to get it absolute. Well, he's a drummer, right? So he wants it absolutely spot knacker on, and of course the slightest variation in time and anything which is human would drive him nuts. I wouldn't even notice it. So we used the Lindrum on Wedding Bells. He programmed the drums on that for the first time, and that's what I remember most about that track. The rhythm section came from a machine.
Wedding Bells reached the top 10 at the end of 1981 and became a radio favourite, but not before the record company insisted that the original version was cut down in size. Kevin Godley.
It was a bit long, I think. I think there was a bit in the middle where the powers that be thought, well, actually, we don't want to release a single that's, 4.5 minutes. Is there any way you could chop a bit out of the middle? And the tools of the trade back then for chopping bits out of the middle weren't as sophisticated as they are now. So that edit you hear, which is one of the most obvious edits in any track, anywhere, at any time, was just a physical removal. It's a chop, it's an edit, it's a cut. And not a good one at that.
I thought it was a particularly fine edit myself. Of course I would. It was my first time with a razor blade. When it was played on the radio, Tony Blackburn, I think it was, said, God, terrible edit. Do you know, I didn't even realise that edit was noticeable. But I don't do that anymore. I have people to do the editing for me.
I knew I should have told you all I wanted was to have some fun. But you wanted me to be the permanent one. Oh, I do it, but the pleasure isn't worth the pain. We'd run out of track before we got on the train. Can't you hear the sound of heartstrings snapping under the strain of those wedding bells? Those wedding bells.
Wedding Bells was undoubtedly the more commercial side of Godley and Creme and went hand in hand with a burgeoning secondary career as video directors. One of their most popular and controversial promos was the battle between Ronald Reagan and Konstantin Chernenko for Frankie Goes to Hollywood's Two Tribes, a record produced by Trevor Horn. A year after the Frankie release, Godley and Creme were in the charts themselves, with a track produced by Trevor and a video they directed, Cry.
It was always an awkward thing when we had to make a video for ourselves. And indeed, the first idea for Cry was to get Torvill and Dean to skate to it, which they agreed to do. But unfortunately, our schedules didn't work out. They weren't available, they were away or something, so we had to come up with another idea. And thank God we did.
Kevin and I had the most natural, God-given rapport, I think. Personally, that's the way I'll always think of that, as having the most fabulous rapport with somebody where it's almost unspoken, the choices that get made and the way you bounce ideas. It's very difficult to say that was my idea and that was his idea. You know, you're thinking like one person, you're two halves of the same entity. When we came to work with Trevor and doing Cry, it was a very similar sort of thing that I felt with Trevor, where very little had to be said, and even though he was such a different kind of producer, he was a professional producer, and having a professional producer working with me and Kev was a real fabulous revelation. Actually, it's just different, and I sort of fell in love with Trevor, and I've been mates ever since.
Kevin and Lol are still both actively involved with music, as are Graham and Eric. Kevin's lent his expertise to a recording studio on the west coast of Ireland near Dublin, and he has new film projects. Lol's a member of the most recent lineup of The Art of Noise, and he's on hand whenever Trevor Horn needs to get together a house band. Graham's been out on the road recently under the 10cc banner, and Eric's been recording at his base in France, his most recent CD being a collection of new songs called Viva la Difference.
I looked into the sky last night. The stars above me, they were burning bright. A sea of time around a million suns. I can't believe we are the only ones. I do believe we're not alone. I looked into my baby's eyes. I saw the spark of life that never dies. No need to worry who will follow me. The thread is there throughout eternity. I do believe we're not alone.
Eric Stewart with We're Not Alone, taken from his album Viva la Difference. The original four members of 10cc were only together for a short period in the mid-70s, but their influence has been far-reaching. They count members of R.E.M. and The Feeling amongst their admirers, while their songs have been covered by Tori Amos, Fun-Loving Criminals, Grandaddy, The Pretenders and many more. Eric, Graham, Kevin and Lol were a solid and democratic writing and recording unit that took chances in the studio. And from the self-titled 10cc through to How Dare You, they jointly produced 4 albums of tremendous wit, musicality and inventiveness. Eric Stewart.
I think 10cc will have some sort of a place in musical history, in that the uniqueness of the band in that we were 4 people who could all sing, who could all play instruments pretty well, who could all write a hit song, and did. I think it was a lovely combination. I don't think I've seen it before with any other band. I'm sure somebody will correct me if that's not true.
Looking back on what we achieved in a very short space of time, 4 albums I think we did in 4 years. It is a very big high point in my life and a cherished 4 years. I'm proud of what we managed to put out there.
I was enjoying all the dabbling that I got to do with music, with recording, with cameras, with film, with people, artists and stuff like that. Hopefully the legacy is one of fun, really, you know, enjoyment of the medium as opposed to anything else, to be honest.
But their legacy goes way beyond their own recorded music. Eric and Graham's original investment in Strawberry Studios has provided a working environment for future generations of bands. Graham Gouldman.
The sort of post-10cc era bands, young bands, came through Strawberry Studios. Martin Hannett was in there, produced Happy Mondays and Joy Division, and no doubt about it, it made a big contribution to the whole sort of Manchester scene.
Happy Mondays and Lazy Itis, whose overdubs, vocal tracking and mixdown were all done at the studio once owned by members of 10cc. I'm Richard Allenson. The record producers was devised by Steve Levine, written and produced by Neil